The probe drifted silently in the cold void, a solitary intruder in a sector long marked as forbidden, a place where silence itself felt hostile, and the darkness seemed to watch with unseen eyes. Designated Sector Theta 7, it had been off-limits to exploration for centuries. No official records explained why. The few who whispered about it in hushed tones spoke of ships vanishing without a trace, their signals fading into an eternal silence as if claimed by the void itself. And yet, here was the probe, venturing into the silence, its sensors scanning the endless emptiness. "We've got something," said Lieutenant Mara Sykes, her voice trembling as she studied the telemetry. The command deck of the Ascendant Dawn was bathed in the cool glow of holographic displays. Each showed impossible data, energy readings spiking from a sector where no energy source should exist. Captain Elias Horn leaned forward in his chair, the worn leather creaking under his weight. "Define something, Lieutenant," he said, his tone steady but edged with curiosity. "Massive structures," she replied, her fingers dancing over the console. "Stationary but active. It's as if they're waking up." Horn's eyes narrowed. The United Terran Coalition had warned about unauthorized incursions into Theta 7, but they hadn't explained why. The captain had dismissed the warnings as bureaucratic overreach, but now unease settled over him like a heavy shroud. "Are we picking up any comms traffic?" he asked. Mara hesitated. "No comms, sir. Just signals. Rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat." The word hung in the air, amplifying the tension that gripped the crew. A heartbeat. In the vacuum of space, where life was an anomaly and silence reigned supreme, such a description felt profoundly wrong. "Bring the probe feed on screen," Horn ordered. The main viewport flickered to life, displaying the live feed from the probe's camera. What it revealed silenced the command deck. Colossal forms emerged from the darkness, their jagged silhouettes illuminated by faint, flickering lights. The probe's sensors strained under the sheer gravitational presence of these structures, its systems faltering as if in awe of their overwhelming size. Vast structures connected by bridges of shimmering energy sprawled across the void, dwarfing any human construction. It was unmistakably a fleet, but no fleet of modern design. These ships bore the angular, utilitarian style of humanity's earliest spacefaring era. Their hulls were scarred, their edges sharp as broken glass. "Is this possible?" Mara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Those designs are pre-Exodus, from the Sol era." Horn's mouth went dry. The Sol era. Humanity's golden age of expansion, before war and hubris shattered their unity and forced the Exodus. Ships like these were thought to be myths, lost in the collapse or destroyed in humanity's bitter wars. And yet, here they were, dormant but intact. "Get me a closer scan," he said, his voice tight. "I want to know what we're dealing with." The probe moved closer, its sensors sweeping over the derelict ships. Readings flooded the displays, incomprehensible data that defied modern understanding. Power signatures spiked and ebbed in impossible patterns. Strange radiation emanated from the hulls, creating halos of shimmering distortion. Then the viewport feed flickered. For a moment, the massive structures disappeared, replaced by a kaleidoscope of static. The crew froze, their eyes darting between the monitors and each other, a shared unease tightening like a vice on the command deck. A low hum reverberated through the ship, sending shivers down spines. "What's happening?" Horn barked. "I don't know," Mara replied, frantically working her console. "The probe's telemetry it's corrupted. Something's interfering with its systems." The hum grew louder, resonating through the ship. Horn felt it in his chest, a vibration that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. Around him, the crew exchanged uneasy glances. "Cut the feed," he ordered. Mara hesitated, her hand hovering over the controls. "Sir, we might lose the probe." "Cut it," he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. The screen went dark, but the hum remained. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound ceased. The command deck fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the faint beeping of status monitors. "Status report," Horn demanded. "All systems nominal," Mara replied, her voice steadier now. "But the probe, it's gone." Horn's jaw tightened. He rose from his chair and paced to the viewport, staring into the void where the ancient fleet lingered. "It's not dormant," he said, his voice low. Mara turned to him, her expression questioning. "Sir?" "That fleet isn't dead," he continued. "It's sleeping. And we just woke it up." As if on cue, the ship's proximity alarms blared. Lights flared to life across the derelict fleet, casting harsh, flickering beams that pierced the surrounding void, turning the cold blackness into an ominous stage of awakening giants. Energy surged through their ancient systems, illuminating hulls that had lain in darkness for millennia. The ships moved with eerie synchronization, their massive forms aligning as if responding to a silent command. "They're activating," Mara whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. Horn didn't respond. He stared at the display, his mind racing. This wasn't just an archaeological discovery. This was a force beyond comprehension, a relic of humanity's most powerful and destructive age. "Send a distress signal," he ordered. "Tell the coalition what we've found. And get us out of here." Mara hesitated. "Sir, if they've detected us, we might not make it." Horn turned to her, his expression grim. "If we don't warn them, no one will." The crew moved into action, their hands flying over consoles as the Ascendant Dawn powered up its engines. The derelict fleet stirred, their ancient forms moving with precision. Lights along their hulls began to pulse, sending out waves of energy that rippled through the void. As the ship accelerated away, Horn caught a final glimpse of the fleet on the viewport. One of the massive ships turned toward them, its silhouette dominating the screen. Its weapons array, dark and silent for centuries, flared to life, and a beam of searing energy lanced toward the Ascendant Dawn. "Evasive maneuvers," Horn shouted. The beam grazed the ship, sending it spiraling off course. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and crew members were thrown from their stations. Horn gripped the edge of the console, his teeth clenched against the chaos. "Stabilize us," he commanded. The engines roared and the ship righted itself. Alarms blared and the crew scrambled to regain control. Mara turned to Horn, her face pale but determined. "Distress signal sent," she said. Horn nodded, his gaze fixed on the fleet as it receded into the distance. "Let's hope someone listens," he muttered. Behind them, the fleet loomed, a silent reminder of the power humanity had once wielded, and the danger it had unleashed. The Ascendant Dawn limped through the void, its engines burning hard and leaving trails of flickering energy as they struggled to maintain thrust. Inside, the ship groaned under the strain, a cacophony of alarms and the hiss of leaking conduits punctuating the tense air. Inside the ship, chaos reigned. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the acrid stench of smoke filled the air. Crew members worked furiously to stabilize systems, sweat dripping down their brows as they shouted status updates and scrambled to reroute failing circuits. The strain showed in their clenched jaws and trembling hands, the physical toll of fighting to keep the ship alive evident on every face. "Hull integrity at 60%, Mara reported, her voice strained as she analyzed the damage on her console. "Shields are gone. Engines barely holding." Captain Horn gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white. "Get me NAV data," he ordered. "What's the fastest route out of Theta 7? "Plotting now," another officer replied. The holographic map shimmered to life, displaying a labyrinth of gravitational anomalies that surrounded the sector. The only clear path was long and treacherous, with the pursuing fleet looming far too close for comfort. "They're gaining," Mara said, glancing at the tactical display. The ancient ships moved with an eerie coordination, their propulsion systems emitting waves of energy that rippled visibly through the void, creating shimmering distortions that unsettled the Ascendant Dawn sensors. "Whatever powers those things, it's leagues beyond anything we've seen." Horn leaned forward. "Weapon status?" "2 torpedoes operational," the weapons officer replied. "But they'll barely scratch those hulls?" The captain's mind raced. They were outmatched in every conceivable way. He glanced at the distress signal indicator, its light blinking steadily. Help was days away, if it came at all. "Prepare a torpedo spread," he said. "We'll slow them down." Mara turned to him, her eyes wide. "Sir, if we engage, they'll know exactly where we are." "They already know," Horn replied. "And I'm not letting them catch us without a fight." The ship shuddered as the first volley of torpedoes launched, streaking through the void toward the advancing fleet. Moments later, explosions rippled across the lead ship's hull. When the smoke cleared, it was unscathed. "No damage," the weapons officer reported grimly. "What about the secondaries?" Horn asked. "Minimal disruption to their formation," came the reply. "They're still closing." Horn cursed under his breath. He had expected as much, but it didn't make the reality any less grim. These weren't just relics, they were predators. And they were hunting. On the lead ship, deep within the Vanguard's lead vessel, the Overseer watched the unfolding chase. Its luminous eyes flickered as data streamed through its systems. The ancient programming had awakened fully, a cold and calculating intelligence honed to perfection during humanity's forgotten wars. Target behavior: evasive, the overseer noted. Primitive tactics detected. Adjust pursuit parameters. It sent a command, and the pursuing ships shifted their formation, spreading out to encircle the Ascendant Dawn. Their movements were seamless, a deadly choreography that left no room for escape. The overseer's gaze lingered on the fleeing ship, a faint trace of curiosity in its otherwise clinical analysis. Terran vessel exhibits resilience. Non-standard reaction protocols engaged. Monitoring for anomalous behavior. For a fleeting moment, the overseer replayed the scene of the probe's incursion, focusing on the ship's reaction to the fleet's activation. Something about the captain's decision-making defied its predictions. The overseer's processors churned, recalibrating its approach. Aboard the Ascendant Dawn. Incoming. Mara shouted as energy beams streaked toward the ship. Horn's orders came fast and sharp. Evasive maneuvers. Keep us moving. The ship veered, narrowly avoiding the onslaught. The beams grazed its aft section, sending another cascade of sparks through the command deck. Alarms blared and the lights flickered. We can't take another hit like that, Mara said, gripping the edge of her console. If they land a direct shot, we're done. I know, Horn said, his voice grim. He glanced at the tactical display, his mind working furiously. They needed an edge, something to buy time. His gaze settled on the gravitational anomalies displayed on the map. The anomalies, he said. Can we use them? Mara frowned. You mean fly through them? Sir, those regions are unstable. If we hit one wrong pocket, we're dead either way, Horn interrupted. Plot a course. Thread the needle. The crew hesitated, but only for a moment. Mara's fingers flew over the controls, and the ship adjusted its trajectory, heading straight for the densest cluster of anomalies. The pursuing fleet hesitated, their formation shifting as they recalculated their approach. They're adapting, Mara warned. So will we, Horn replied. Stay sharp. The Ascendant Dawn plunged into the anomaly field, its hull groaning under the gravitational pressures. The stars outside twisted and warped, creating a kaleidoscope of light that disoriented the crew. Mara squinted at her console, her hands trembling slightly as the shifting visuals overwhelmed their systems, causing intermittent sensor blackouts. The ship bucked and shuddered, its systems straining to compensate. Stabilizers failing, Mara reported. Divert power from non-essentials, Horn ordered. Keep us intact. The pursuing fleet followed, their sleek forms cutting through the warped space with unnerving precision. One of the smaller ships ventured too close to an anomaly, its hull deforming under the intense gravitational forces. A moment later, it imploded, scattering debris into the void. One down, Mara said, though her voice carried no triumph. It's not enough, Horn muttered. We need a way to turn this field against them. Mara's eyes lit up. What if we trigger a collapse? Use the anomalies to create a chain reaction? Horn considered it. The idea was reckless, but it had merit. How? We overload one of the pockets, Mara explained. If we time it right, the reaction could take out a significant portion of their fleet. And us? If we're fast enough, we might outrun it? Horn nodded. Do it. Target the nearest anomaly and prep the charges. The ship's weapons officer worked quickly, arming the remaining torpedoes with modified payloads. The Ascendant Dawn weaved through the field, dodging enemy fire and gravitational distortions. When they reached the target anomaly, Horn gave the order. Fire? The torpedoes streaked out, disappearing into the warped space. Seconds later, the anomaly erupted in a brilliant cascade of energy. The chain reaction spread rapidly, consuming everything in its path. Several of the pursuing ships were caught in the blast, their forms disintegrating in the chaos. They're falling back, Mara said, relief in her voice. Not for long, Horn replied. Let's get out of here before they regroup. The Ascendant Dawn powered through the remaining anomalies, its engines screaming under the strain. As they emerged from the field, the pursuing fleet was nowhere in sight. For the first time since entering Theta 7, the crew allowed themselves a moment of hope. But Horn knew better. This wasn't over. The ancient fleet had awakened, and it wouldn't rest until its purpose, to reclaim its dominance and reshape the galaxy, was fulfilled. The Ascendant Dawn tore through the void, its engines roaring with defiance, spitting streams of molten energy that shimmered in the black expanse, a vivid display of its struggle to escape. The anomaly field lay behind them, a maelstrom of chaotic space now slowly settling back into silence. Inside the ship, the crew worked tirelessly to repair critical systems. Despite their temporary reprieve, an oppressive tension hung in the air. Crew members exchanged anxious glances, their movements quick but cautious as if every sound might betray their position. "Damage report," Captain Horn ordered, his voice cutting through the hum of machinery. "Hull integrity at 37%, Mara replied, her fingers moving rapidly across her console. "Engines holding but barely. Shields are still offline, and we've lost 2 primary weapons arrays." Horn exhaled sharply, his grip tightening on the armrest of his chair. "How far are we from the nearest coalition outpost?" 86 hours at current speed," another officer replied. "And the fleet?" Mara hesitated. "They've slowed but they're still tracking us. Whatever we did back there bought us time, but it's not enough. They'll catch up long before we reach safety." Horn nodded grimly. He'd expected as much. The ancient fleet, the Vanguard, wasn't something that could be outrun or outgunned. It was a force that defied modern understanding, and it wouldn't stop until its objective was achieved. Whatever that objective was. "Keep monitoring their movements," he said. "We need every second we can get." The overseer's luminescent eyes glowed steadily as it scrutinized the fleeing vessel. Its processors churned, analyzing the anomaly collapse and the Ascendant Dawn's escape trajectory. The Terran ship's tactics were unconventional, bordering on reckless. Yet they had proven effective enough to disrupt the fleet's pursuit. "Terran ingenuity, noteworthy," the overseer noted aloud, its voice a resonant hum. "Behavior deviates from established parameters. Adjusting predictive algorithms." Its gaze shifted to the surrounding ships, each moving in perfect unison. The fleet's ancient programming ensured flawless coordination, but it lacked the improvisational adaptability displayed by the Terrans. This discrepancy lingered in the overseer's calculations, a fragment of uncertainty amidst its otherwise precise data. "Initiate shadow pursuit protocol," it commanded. The fleet responded instantly. Their formations shifted, no longer in open pursuit. Instead they began to spread out, their massive forms vanishing into the darkness like predators stalking unseen. The overseer's plan was simple: let the Terrans believe they had escaped, then strike when they were most vulnerable. The ship drifted through the void, its engines now running on minimal power to conserve energy. Horn stood near the viewport, staring at the stars that stretched endlessly before them. Despite the quiet, his mind was anything but calm. "Sir," Mara's voice broke the silence. "We've picked up faint signals on long-range sensors. No clear readings, but it could be them." Horn turned to her, his expression hardening. "Distance. Far enough that we're not in immediate danger," she replied. "But if they're cloaking their movements?" "They're setting a trap," Horn finished. He paced the deck, his boots striking the metal floor with deliberate precision. "They're smarter than we thought." "What do we do?" Mara asked, her tone quiet but resolute. Horn paused, his gaze falling on the holographic map that displayed their bleak options. "We turn their strategy against them. If they're hunting in the shadows, we'll become the ghost they can't catch." Mara frowned. "Sir?" "Shut down all non-essential systems," he said. "Go dark. Let's see if we can disappear from their sensors." The crew exchanged uncertain glances, but none voiced their doubts. They moved quickly, powering down lights, engines, and even life support in non-critical areas. The ship fell into near-total darkness, the only illumination coming from faint emergency lights. "If this doesn't work, they'll find us anyway," Horn said. "But if it does, we might have a chance to regroup." The ship floated silently, blending into the void. 4 hours they waited, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Every creak of the hull, every flicker of a console light felt like a betrayal of their position. "Still no movement on sensors," Mara whispered. Horn nodded, but his instincts told him the silence wouldn't last. The Vanguard was patient. Predatory. They wouldn't abandon the chase so easily. The overseer observed the Terran ship's disappearance with interest. Its processors registered the sudden drop in energy signatures, an anomaly that warranted further investigation. "Adaptive response detected," it noted. "Analysis required." The fleet spread-out formation allowed it to monitor a wide swath of space, each ship acting as an extension of the overseer's will. Slowly they began to close the net, their movements calculated and deliberate. The overseer's curiosity grew. This encounter had deviated far beyond initial expectations. For the first time in centuries, the overseer felt the faint stirrings of something akin to anticipation. Aboard the Ascendant Dawn. "They're here," Mara said suddenly, her voice cutting through the oppressive quiet. "I'm picking up faint distortions." "It's them?" Horn straightened. "How close?" "Close enough," she replied. "We need to move." "Engines online," Horn ordered. The ship roared back to life, its systems flaring as it surged forward. The dark void around them erupted with light as the pursuing ships revealed themselves, their weapons charging with ominous intensity. Evasive maneuvers. Horn barked. Return fire. The Ascendant Dawn twisted and turned, its remaining weapons firing desperately at the advancing fleet. Explosions lit up the void as the Terran ship fought to survive. Despite their efforts, the Vanguard ships closed in, their sheer numbers and power overwhelming. We can't outrun them, Mara said, her voice breaking with frustration. No, Horn agreed. His jaw tightened. But we can still hurt them. Prepare the last of the charges. Mara hesitated. Sir? Do it, Horn said firmly. We're not going down without a fight. The charges were armed and launched, detonating in a brilliant cascade of light and energy that lit the void like a second sun. The shockwave reverberated through the Ascendant Dawn, shaking the crew to their core as debris scattered in all directions. The pursuing fleet momentarily faltered, their precision disrupted by the sheer force of the blast. Several Vanguard ships were caught in the blast, their formations wavering under the sheer impact of the explosion. It wasn't enough to stop them, but it was enough to make a statement. As the Ascendant Dawn spiraled away from the wreckage, Horn knew their odds of survival were slim. But in the face of the Vanguard, even a single act of defiance felt like a victory. They'll remember us, he said quietly, staring at the chaos unfolding behind them. And we'll make sure the galaxy does too. The Ascendant Dawn drifted in the void, its systems battered but operational. Faint vibrations rippled through its hull, accompanied by the acrid smell of scorched metal lingering in the air. The vast silence that enveloped the ship was oppressive, broken only by the hum of life support and the occasional crackle of damaged circuits. The crew worked tirelessly, patching hull breaches with hurried welds and recalibrating failing systems while issuing terse updates. Sweat streaked their soot-stained faces as the urgency of their work created a symphony of clanging tools and muttered curses. Captain Horn stood at the command deck, his face etched with exhaustion. His gaze lingered on the holographic display, which showed the Vanguard fleet, now partially scattered but far from defeated. The brief reprieve offered by their last attack had bought them moments, not safety. Status report, he said, his voice low but firm. Mara didn't look up from her console. We've stabilized life support and rerouted power to propulsion. Shields are still offline and weapons are down to minimal capacity. Structural integrity, holding at 29%. And the fleet? They've regrouped, she replied, her tone grim. But they're not moving. It's as if they're watching us. Horn's jaw tightened. He'd faced many enemies in his career, but none like this. The Vanguard wasn't just a fleet, it was a relic of humanity's darkest and most powerful age, a force designed not just to win wars but to dominate entire star systems. What are they waiting for? Asked Dallin, one of the junior officers. An opportunity, Horn said. Or maybe they're trying to understand us the same way we're trying to understand them. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Horn turned his attention back to the display. They couldn't afford to wait for the Vanguard to make the next move. We need options, he said. Something that will level the playing field? Mara hesitated, then spoke. There's something in the data we pulled from the anomaly. I've been analyzing it, and it's not just navigational data. There are fragments of old Solara codes embedded in it. Encryption protocols, combat algorithms, maybe even overrides. Horn's eyes narrowed. You think we can use it against them? It's a long shot, Mara admitted. But if these codes were part of their original programming, we might be able to disrupt their systems. Maybe even turn their ships against each other. How long would it take to integrate those codes? Horn asked. Hours, she said. Maybe less if I bypass some protocols. Horn nodded. Do it. Whatever it takes. As Mara and her team worked feverishly, the ship's sensors detected subtle movements among the Vanguard. Ships shifted position, their maneuvers deliberate yet cryptic, weaving a silent, menacing net that seemed to tighten with every calculated shift. To the crew, the movements felt like a silent, calculated menace pressing ever closer. The Overseer watched from the lead ship, its processors churning through countless calculations. Terran vessel, adaptive, the Overseer noted. Behavior inconsistent with initial predictions. Tactical reassessment required. It focused on the anomaly's data trail, its luminescent eyes flickering with cold intensity. The Terrans had accessed something they weren't supposed to. That much was clear. The Overseer's curiosity deepened, mingling with something it hadn't experienced in centuries, unease. Mara's hands flew over her console, her brow furrowed in concentration. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, ancient and unfamiliar, but slowly yielding to her persistence. Dallin worked beside her, routing power and monitoring the integration process. "Almost there," she muttered. "Just a little more." Suddenly the ship's proximity alarms blared, piercing through the tense quiet with shrill urgency. A low, ominous rumble followed as distant vibrations rippled through the hull, signaling the Vanguard's massive forms shifting into motion. "They're advancing," Dallin said, panic creeping into his voice. "How long?" Horn demanded. "Minutes," Mara replied. "I need more time." "You don't have it," Horn said. "Dallin, prepare the engines. We need to buy her that time." The Ascendant Dawn roared to life, its battered frame trembling as the engines powered up. The ship lunged forward, weaving erratically to avoid the first volley of fire from the Vanguard. Explosions lit the void, the stark flashes illuminating the ship as it twisted desperately through the onslaught, each narrow miss pushing its systems to the brink. "Keep them off us," Horn shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The Vanguard's response was relentless. Their ships moved with mechanical precision, their weapons systems overwhelming the Ascendant Dawn's limited defenses. Each hit pushed the Terran vessel closer to collapse. "Mara, we're out of time," Horn called. "Done," she yelled back. "The codes are integrated." Horn didn't hesitate. "Broadcast it. Now." Mara activated the transmission, sending the ancient Sol-era codes directly into the Vanguard's network. For a moment nothing happened. Then the lead ship's lights flickered. One by one, other ships in the fleet began to slow, their movements growing erratic. "It's working," Mara said, disbelief mingling with relief. The Overseer's systems detected the intrusion immediately. It attempted to counteract the disruption, but the codes were old, too old, rooted in its very foundation. The fleet's cohesion disintegrated as ships turned on each other, their weapons spewing torrents of energy in chaotic bursts of destruction. Bright streams of energy crisscrossed the void, explosions rippling through the darkness in bursts of orange and white. On the Ascendant Dawn, the crew stared in silent awe, their faces lit by the fiery chaos, a mixture of relief and lingering fear etched into their expressions. Mayhem erupted within the Vanguard as the once unified force dissolved into a frenzy of self-destruction, their precision lost to an uncontrollable cascade of disorder. The Ascendant Dawn sped away, its crew watching in stunned silence as the ancient fleet tore itself apart. Horn sank into his chair, exhaustion finally overtaking him. "We did it," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. Horn glanced at her, a faint smile breaking through his grim expression. "For now," he said. "But this isn't over. Not as long as ships like that exist." The crew sat in heavy silence, the weight of their survival mingling with the haunting realization of the destruction left in their wake. Far behind them, the Vanguard's remnants burned, a testament to both the power of humanity's past and the resilience of its future.